Art is Work, Work is Art is hosted by McGill University, which is physically located on the Chaudière, otherwise known as Montreal. It is situated on traditional and unceded territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka. This land has long served as a site for meeting and exchanges among Indigenous peoples, including the Henderson and Anishinaabeg nations. We acknowledge and thank these Indigenous people whose presence marked this territory on which our peoples of the world now gather. I would also like to share the acknowledgement of the development of the Feminist Media Studio at Concordia University for our pandemic form of assembly, while Zoom, a company which has exploded in value during the pandemic, which I'm sure you're all familiar with at this point, is technically a custodial platform on which we gather, makes us no less occasions on territories. The headquarters is located on territory also owned by Indigenous peoples. We have historically understood about the assembly, commonly understood the gifts of those who share their practices, their organizations. We see this platform as a means of connecting with others, which alienates us from forms of restriction, social justice. Shannon puts the link in the chat. So thank you to all of the artists today. Today's Artists' Work is brought to you by the PLANCE Initiative for Excellence in Education and the Arts, which is coordinated by McGill University Faculty of Education, Department of Integrated Studies in Education, the Institute for Human Development and Wellbeing, and the Participatory Cultures Lab. This initiative is made possible by generous support of Pauline Smith. And after today's panel, I invite you to watch a short video of Pauline's contribution and this initiative that is posted at the symposium website in the chat. The Artists in Residence program is a cornerstone of the PLANCE Initiative for Excellence in Education. This two-day symposium features presentations by all 12 of the past artists in residence and was organized by the current artist in residence, the wonderful, incredibly talented Dana McLeod, and is assisted today by the amazing Shannon Roy. So I'd like to thank both of them for their amazing work. Today's event, first and foremost, thank you all for taking the time out of your day to be here today. We appreciate you being with us in whatever time zone and whatever place you've chosen to join us. During this panel, please feel free to use the chat to share thoughts, comments, and receive links. We will be having a Q&A after the presentations. You're welcome to raise your hand, or if you prefer, you can place your comments in the chat and I can read them aloud. Today's speakers features Lori Vivas, Maria Ezcurra, and Victoria Stanton. I will briefly introduce each one of them before their 15 to 20 minute presentation, and a longer bio will be placed in the chat for you. So first off, welcome Lori. Lori is the fourth PLANCE Artist in Residence who served here from 2016 to 2017. Lori Vivas is a creator, arts educator, art historian living and working in Montreal, identifying as being from Mississauga and Anishinaabe and Irish Welsh descent. She is a band member of the Hawortha First Nations and Rice Lake, Ontario. Her current work, art practices, and research articulates narrative and memory in the context of family and cultural history and reflects on cultural identity, arts education, and self-representation. Take it away, Lori.
Thank you. Miigwech. Okay. Put it on. Okay, great. Ani, please let me begin by introducing myself. Lori Beavis, Indigenous Cause, Pemadash Kutayang, Ngoja Wanong, Wawashki Nudodum. My name is Lori Beavis. My source communities are at Pemadash Kutang in Anishinaabe, Moan, meaning the place cross, now called Rice Lake, and Ngoja Wanong, or place at the end of the rapids, now called Peterborough, Ontario. My clan is the Hoof, the Deer People, the Helpers. I was raised on Michi-Saagiig Anishinaabe territory at Ngoja Wanong, Peterborough, Ontario. My maternal family is Michi-Saagiig Anishinaabe, who made treaty at Rice Lake in 1818. And my paternal family are Irish settlers from County Fermanagh, who came to Peterborough on the traditional Michi-Saagiig territory in 1823. I'm a guest living and working on Tujagi in the language of the Ganagahaka and Moniang to the Anishinaabe. Today I'm speaking from Treaty 4 territory at Regina, Saskatchewan, on the lands of the Cree and the Saulteaux Nations. Thank you, Dana McLeod, for organizing this symposium and bringing all the P-Lance, DICE, artists and residents together. This is something that everybody talked about a lot and just is fabulous. I'm especially pleased to be on this panel with Maria Skura and Victoria Stanton. Since Dana invited me to be part of the symposium, I've been thinking a lot about my time as an heir. A few months prior to applying for the residency in 2016, a friend had challenged me to tell him what art I was going to make. I made some vague answer and he asked, no, what is going to be your art project? What art are you going to start making? I didn't know what to say because while always interested in and on the periphery of the arts, I had resisted thinking of myself as an artist. Then I did begin to consider what I would create and why. I had just spent the previous 3 years, actually part of 7 before that as well, doing research and interviews for my dissertation. I was aided in my research by Shelley Nero, Nadia Mir, Jory Kashin, and Lisa Myers, and we parsed questions around the intersection between their cultural identity and art experiences across their lifetime. At the same time, I talked a lot to my mom at that time about her experiences growing up on or near the Hiawatha First Nation Reserve, and we reminisced about taking my grandmother to her first powwow at Trent University in the mid-1970s. As you know, the Indian Act made it illegal for First Nations people to practice ceremonies or participate in cultural gatherings and practices. In 1895, any Indian festival or dance or ceremony, which would include powwows and the Sundance, were also banned. In 1914, another amendment outlawed dancing off reserve, and in 1925, dancing was outlawed entirely. My grandmother was born at Hiawatha First Nation on Rice Lake in 1907. She was 70 years old when she saw her first jingle dancer. Jingle dancing is a woman and young girls dance, The dresses have metal cones attached that make a distinctive sound when they are dancing. The shape and sound of the jingles is said to spread healing, whether dancing for one person or a whole nation. I knew that the first work I needed to do in my residency was to make the jingle dress for Laura. I made the dress for a 4-year-old girl with 2 rows of jingles. The number of jingles on the dress increased year by year, with a new row added each year. This is the dress my grandmother would have worn as a child. I saw it as representative of my grandmother's identity as Michi-Saagiig Anishinaabe, and at the same time a celebratory article of regalia, identity, and memory for me. The year as an heir helped me, I'm just gonna remember to turn the thing. The year as an heir helped me refine and clarify the way my cultural influences have made me the person I am. I've been raised in the context mostly of my maternal family's cultural perspectives and Anishinaabe processes of learning and knowledge transmission. I hope that in my actions and activities at the Faculty of Education, I was creating a space where students could share their own worldview, knowledge of themselves and their experiences of Indigenous art, history, and people. And through this interface, learning could take place. I believe that in the instances or projects developed during the 2016-17 People's Knowledge of contemporary artists, filmmakers, and their art practices were furthered and that learning did take place. For example, the weekly film, and so I'm just going to go through some of the projects that I did. The weekly film series that began in November 2016 was a good way to enter into Indigenous worldviews as well as social issues, also with lots of humor involved. We began with Shelley Nero's 2012 film Robert's Paintings, and amongst others, we showed Nero's Kissed by Lightning and Honey Moccasin. We showed on Halloween, we showed Jeff Barnaby's Rhymes for Young Rules, or Chris Ayres' Smoke Signals, and a number of Alanis Obomsawin's National Film Board films, such as Ganasataki, 270 Years of Resistance, The People of Gadawapiskat, and Hey Ho, Mr. Hey. This project came to a nice conclusion when doctoral student Brett Party and I presented at the 2019 Congress at UBC on the film series as a pedagogical method, in which viewing the films helped allies better understand Indigenous histories and experiences. I have to tell you, though, that we had made a pact beforehand that if no one showed up at our panel, we were going to run to hear Dana Claxton talk on Indigenous art and pedagogy, but thankfully a few people showed up. I also wanted to find a way to present work by contemporary artists in the public spaces of the education building. In early 2017, I made the series Jigwe AIM, a QR code project. This was a cumulative 9-week project that introduced artists and their artwork to students, faculty, and staff. The Jigwe AIM project was created with the help of Stephen Lala. We figured out the technology of creating and printing the codes that could take people to my essay about the artists. Laurie Blondeau, Shelley Nero's work is in screen, Nadia Mir, Barry Ace, Adrian Stimson, David Garneau, Barry Pottle, and Kent Monkman. And so that people would learn more about their practice and the social or political issue that the work addressed. By the way, I have to mention at this point the support staff, Jim Harris, Deb Machette, Stephen Lala, and many others who became fantastic allies in the work that we were doing as artists in residence. Two other quick mentions. In December 2016, Montreal supports No DAPL with our good friend Haiti Lefebvre-Smith. We set up workstations at different sites around the campus. We talked with students about the protests at the Dakota Access Pipeline and had people make postcards using templates that we then sent along with the art supplies that we had bought and gathered to the protest site in North Dakota as a show of support for that Christmas. And a tiny guerrilla paperwork project that I did that addressed Indigenous literacy in the Friere cabinet on the first floor of the ED building. I used photocopies of book covers and I made paper jingles using old books that I'd found outside the library. I was never quite sure if anyone had ever noticed this empty cabinet had come to life, but just before I left McGill in late 2019, I think it was, someone came and asked, well, they didn't say this, but who had interfered with the cabinet 3 years later. Somebody finally noticed when they wanted to put their own work into that cabinet. Finally, the project that extended across the longest length of time that I was in residence was the Grandmother's Recipes and Family Histories. This was also the project that was both the hardest and the one where the most learning for me took place. When I moved into what was in 2016 the Archive, it was a large open space that time and everyone else had forgotten. Maria had used this space the previous year, so we just set up the space again with art supplies, tables, and chairs. While in that space in the first weeks that I was in there, I contemplated the dimensions, the ceiling, the lights. If I sat still for too long, the lights went out. The floors were cracked, broken, and missing linoleum tiles, and the walls. I became fascinated by the scrubby, blackened, grayed, and textured wall. There was also the leftover grid from whatever had previously covered the now unfinished walls. I started to hang tea towels. I'll go back to that one for a minute. I started to hang tea towels with handwritten memories of my grandmother using clothespins to hold them in place. She was a dab hand with hanging clothes on a clothesline. But I was really loving the wall, the surface and the length and at least one of the tea towels had a recipe inscribed on it. So I decided I'd start to write out Laura's recipes on the wall surfaces. I tried various writing tools and finally settled on white china markers. The work was hard. The surface was difficult to write on. It was dirty. I scraped my hands. The markers often broke, and it took perseverance because the surface resisted the writing. I took this writing as an analogy for the work it takes to remember, to hold on to memories, and to think about and bring closer the actions and the conversations that one had with the people who were important to us. It was also hard because I couldn't remember all the stories well enough. I hadn't asked enough questions, and sometimes I hadn't listened well enough to the answers. But I continued to work, and eventually I filled the wall. I was able to live with that writing on the walls for 7 months. Then they all got painted over, covered up, and returned to where they had been, back in my memory. Megwitch, thank you.
Thank you so much. That was beautiful. We look forward to talking with you more during our discussion period. Next, we'll hear from Maria Esguerra, who was the first Peatlands Artist in Residence from 2015 to 2016. Maria is a Latin Canadian artist, educator, mother, living in Montreal. She has participated in numerous arts exhibits worldwide, including the Museum of Montreal, Modern Art in Mexico City, the Carl Friedman Gallery in the UK, Nuit Blanche in Toronto, the Museum of Fine Arts in and OBOR. Maria is a recent recipient of grants from the Canadian Council for the Arts, the Council des Arts et Lettres du Québec, and the National System of Art Creators in Mexico. And in 2019, she was awarded the Prix de la Belle Arts by the Carcel de Montreal. She obtained her PhD at Concordia University with the first research-created doctoral program presented at the Department of Arts Education, and has taught in several universities and organizations in Mexico and Canada for over 20 years. Welcome, Maria.
Thanks, Jen. Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to see a lot of familiar names. I cannot see the faces, but yes, I was the first artist in residence. Thank you, Aaron. You don't have to. So I was the first artist in residence in the Faculty of Education. I was working with Jimmy, but Jimmy was working on a high school. So in many ways, I was alone in the building. Our task when we started working as artists in residence was to bring the arts back to the Faculty of Education. At that time, I was finishing my PhD at Concordia University. I was doing a PhD in art education. When I saw the call, I was very excited, but also wasn't sure. It was the best moment for me to apply. I had little kids. I was finishing a PhD. I was trying to keep my practice as an artist going on. But at the same time, as an international student, there were not a lot of opportunities for me to apply for grants or for opportunities like this. So, and it seemed like very exciting, but also a bit intimidating to start to work in McGill. I applied, and luckily I got it. And it was a great opportunity, but was also challenging, like I didn't know the faculty, I didn't know the community, the spaces. So a lot of the work I started doing was to create like connections, like to bring the arts back, was to understand what kind of art we wanted to have in the faculty, what kind of art was already happening, which surprisingly, it was a lot of students and faculty and staff already had like art practices or connections things happening outside or even inside the Faculty of Education. So slowly I started trying to find strategies to connect, mostly with all these people and understanding what their interests were. And also maybe, I did work on some personal projects, but a lot of my effort was on trying to create like channels, bridges to give visibility to all the art that was already going on. I was very lucky, I think the community in the Faculty of Education, I was lucky to work with a very supportive team. And I can say today that I find my experience, I worked 1 year as an artist in residence from 2015 to 16. Then, because we realized like how challenging it could be, I stayed a second year when the new artists came with Laurie and Kama. I stay and I try to use the things I have learned to like help them use those connections and support their own projects. And then we were very lucky. I started one of the projects. I'm showing some pictures now, but like some of the projects I started was a little archive. And then we got some support and an amazing space. And the archive grew and became like a very active, artistic, creative space in the Faculty of Education. So at the end, I was working there from 2015 to 2019 in different forms. And I think my PhD took me 5 years. I was 4 years in the Faculty of Education. And even in different ways, I think in terms of like formative experiences, they were probably equally important for me. So I prepare a presentation. I believe that, and people who know me, a lot of people know me here, sometimes I just prefer to let images talk by themselves. So I'm sharing some images, and later if you have questions, I will be very happy to answer to you. Thank you. Okay.
Fuck.
lucha por tu amor si no tengo nada que perder. Si no me lo das tú, otro lo hará y volveré como siempre a sentirme bien, porque sin amor yo no vivo. Soy como el niño, los desaparecidos, los recuerdos olvidados, el mal sabor más escuchado, los asesinatos sin testigos. No mendigo, solo pido porque tengo mucho que ofrecer. Ahí está el placer de saber ese ruido, aunque me equivoque todo vale. En mi mente en vilo desde el principio, con la verdad a cuestas, me acuesto con lo mismitico que me levanté. Soy lo mismo que ayer, soy lo que me enseñaron los viejos y viejas que escuché. Deja mitad elevada y dividida por la razón de los cosenos. Mi materia gris frente a ti se convierte en un potente veneno. Este calor profundo derrite el solar. Dame una señal ya y pon freno a todas las injusticias en el mundo de Alicia, por no tener claro por qué vamos en este carro sin freno. Mi vida es un sueño, ya llevamos un buen tramo. Yo no me lavo las manos como un matasano. Eso se va a caer tarde o temprano. La mala muerde la manzana. Pierdo esta carta pero estoy en el andén. De aquí no me muevo, no pienso perder el tren. Tengo las palabras mágicas. Papi, escúchame. Pierdo esta carta pero estoy en el andén. De aquí no me muevo, no pienso perder el tren. Tengo las palabras mágicas. Papi, escúchame.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria. That was lovely. And finally, we welcome Victoria Stanton, who is the 6th P-Lance Artist in Residence, who was a resident between 2017 and 2018. The overlapping threads of Victoria's practice as an artist, researcher, creator, educator, place dialogue at the center of her performative works. She's the co-author of 2 books, Impure, Reinventing the World by Continuum Press, 2001, with Vincent Tanguy, and the 7th, Senya La Semi Education, 2017, with Tova Collection, and presented performances influencing the exhibits, and she has had exhibits in Canada, US, Europe, Japan, Mexico, and Cuba. Welcome, Victoria.
Thank you, Jen. I'm gonna do the ubiquitous screen sharing starting now. All right, well, it's quite an act to follow with Maria's presentation just now, but so beautiful to see all of the string of projects connected together in that way. And I'm really glad that we had an opportunity to see, because we've been hearing from everybody individually, and it's really lovely to just see them all put together in this succession of universes. Quite lovely. So thank you for that, Maria, and thanks everyone for your presentations yesterday and today. So I was there in residence, as Jen was saying, 2017, 2018. I shared that time with Erin Richmond. The project that I presented, and in part was in collaboration with Erin at various moments, I had titled Resting, Walking, Placemaking, the Invisible Liminal Spaces in Art. And I'll say that this was very much what the project was predicated upon, thinking about how place influences how we make, how we interact, how spaces of pause are so integral in the creative process, and how walking kind of connects these together with how we think about traversing places. And as Anne Hamilton would say in her art practice, walking a place into her body as a way to apprehend a space and understand one's role as artist in place. And in this case, in the context of being in the Faculty of Education at McGill University. And so much of my practice is predicated on what happens in the invisible, what happens in imperceptible space and time. And so much of that practice being as invisible as it often tends to be, I end up documenting through writing. That has become a really big part of my practice. So during my time in residence at McGill, I kept a blog. I still have this blog. It sort of preceded my residence at McGill in thinking about spaces of rest and pause in this larger project that I have dubbed the Doing Nothing Project, which is still following me now in my current research. And because, as I was saying, so much of that happens in these ephemeral ways, the writing process has become integral. So I was looking back at some of the entries that I had made, and I came across one in particular that I'll share with you today. This will be how I present part of my time at residence at McGill, and also a description and a sense of how it is that I'm impelled to be thinking about making as an artist, particularly as an artist who does mostly time-based work and work that's really responsive to site and to others in place. So this was one of my recapitulations of the midpoint of residence. So I had started, we would start in September, we'd go till April-ish, May in the case of Aaron and I, and this was the kind of midpoint in December, some writings from December 2017. So part one, place is perceptual. I notice how I feel so well when I step foot on campus. Everything just settles. My stress subsides, staving off residual tension from all other facets of my current schedule from the rest of my life. This place is quickly becoming a kind of refuge. But how different would this be if I was a student here? A question I've asked myself. Or if I was full-time faculty or a member of support staff in this building. I overheard a couple of conversations since arriving, so this would have been in September, just after I began, coming from students, past and present, who described quite the opposite sensation. The site is not a source of refuge or creativity, but rather one that inspires a certain degree of angst. As such, I come back again to this notion that an embodied perception of place is directly connected to our experiences that take place in them. Because of course, these would be students who are dealing with very intense schedules and have a very different relationship to this space than I currently do. So if I associate my time here with freedom of thought, open spaces, the giant reservoir across the street that I adored sitting in and walking around, and an intrigue about architectural construction, the education building is quite a gem from its time, then I'm definitely more likely to have a positive feeling when I come here than, say, a student who associates their time with tight deadlines, crammed classrooms, and the overall pressures that characterize student life. I'm not saying that it was only a negative experience for these students, but trying to illustrate how we have a very different relationship coming into this place. And so part two, place is a lived experience. Reflections that have been brewing for the last few weeks and I'm finally thinking about in relation to beginning the residence. I'm noticing that rereading the above passage almost 3 months later, I really don't feel the same now as I did back in September. The weather has changed. I'm not outside as much. I'm hit hard with many deadlines and administrative tasks that have piled up. And so the previous lines that had been drawn around this sanctuary that initially provided me a sense of calm upon arrival have slowly dissipated. Feeling behind on just about all of my work, including the schedule I had set out for myself for various parts of my project in residence, the outside world, which is to say the rest of my life, has completely caught up with me here. And now that this place has become a regular feature in my day-to-day, all these disparate facets of my life follow me everywhere, even on campus. I enjoy being here, of course, but I don't feel the same sense of ease as when I first arrived. As a result of its increasing familiarity, this place has changed, precisely because my lived experience in it has changed. Place is perceptual indeed, and so these textures that I'm showing you are the ubiquitous surfaces inside the education building, the brick walls, the waffle ceilings of concrete, and the wall that faces you where the elevator is as you come in through the front entrance. Part 3, place is an emotional experiential construct. If the experiences that occur in place, in these structures, on these sites, shape our perception, reception, engagement, memory, active articulation, usage of these spaces, then I think it could also be argued that places evolve. Not just physically, by moving a chair from one side of the room to the other, but by energetically and emotionally investing in them. Place is malleable, a construct that we can transform. How can we instigate certain experiences into being? How can we contribute to creating environments that permit certain kinds of behaviors, activities, shifting perceptions that will then shape our experience and by extension transform our sense of place? This is what I came away wondering about after having sat in on a class in early November. So Professor Cheryl Smith-Gilman, who's at McGill in education, teaches a communication and education class to her students, in the class that I sat in, you see an image of here. And in this class, there's a particular exercise that she has them do. So Smith-Gilman herself is a proponent of the Reggio Emilia approach, which is a student-centered philosophy that deeply considers the role of relationship and place in learning for preschool and primary school children. And she introduced me to this in this class that I sat in on with her. So Smith-Gilman encourages her students to think about how and what environments communicate by their particular features and how educators can adapt to and appropriate these in order to create spaces that become more conducive to learning by considering how we occupy these sites. The exercise points to an initial appropriation of the space. So the students go around the building in groups and then come back and write their impressions on whiteboards that are shared with each other. So you observe what you see, what is there, what can be utilized, what can be added to or subtracted from, and what is available and what is ready for setting up your holistic learning environment. You can see some of their remarks here. Starting from an embodied reception of place, which is what Smith-Gilman has her students do. So more closely observing how a particular place makes us feel exactly as it is, we can then go in and propose changes, which can be quite subtle, which can be relatively simple, such as more intimate seating arrangements, adding cushions, plants, student-made art on the walls, etc., which of course, and I'm jumping ahead, but you've already seen in previous presentations, the Art Hive was a place that did just these things. So needless to say, I was fascinated when Professor Smith-Gilman told me about this module in her class because I hadn't realized that these notions that I've been exploring through my performance art practice as cornerstones in my practice were so abundant and abounded in certain educational pedagogies, which is to say, observing how place impacts our actions in it. I was also really excited to see the composition of a classroom with comfy chairs and pillows for young students to hang out in while learning that could be conducive to a mode of rest and relaxation. So she shared some of those images with us in her class. Now, granted, a comfortable place doesn't necessarily guarantee a comfortable experience, but if the philosophy at the outset has us already mindfully and continually tuning into these spaces that populate our day-to-day with the purpose of sensitizing us to the feel of a room, then we're already transcending the notion of place as a merely physical construction and becoming increasingly aware of place as a set of relational circumstances. Experience in place affects our sense of place mindfully, and mindfully altering place can potentially alter our experience in place and our future sense of it. So this can both be positive or negative, clearly, but the goal clearly in Reggio Emilia School is to produce a positive experience. But the point here that I am more interested in making is the very possibility for apprehending a place and further contributing to it through our actions in it, which emerge as a result of our observations of it. To be able to receive what is there in order to work from there, starting as an empathic observer, how do I understand my experience in place? And when and how does my experience of place and actions transform? So part 5, which leads us to this image that you see now, the art hive that Maria introduced us to just before, is titled, "Welcome to your new home, Victoria. McGill now has an art hive." So this is kind of a conclusion to this recap that I had done in thinking about considerations of place. And it really was a new beginning as the year came to a close. So it's worth mentioning an important new development. I'm writing this as if I'm speaking in the present of this having happened in the moment of it. It's worth mentioning an important new development in the Faculty of Education at McGill, which I think will have a direct impact on my experience in place while here in residence. We now have an art hive, now a permanent art hive space, because as we saw, Maria and Lori had created a beautiful gathering as a kind of mobile art hive, which then gradually gave way to this permanent space, which was really quite an incredible development for us. So this space officially opened in late November. This place became the headquarters of the artist in residence, but also an open studio where all members of the McGill community were welcome to come and make art or just hang out, which is so much what my project was about. Comfy chairs, plants, tables for working, and tons of art supplies, along with tea, were all on offer and permanently available from this creative hub. Why I include this last part is that I see more directly the feedback loop that is impacting my experience of this place. When I got busy and overwhelmed with too many demands external to the residents, my previous floating around carefreely upon arrival, this walking the place into my body, was short-circuited by a need to center and ground. So as an artist who I consider my practice to be a post-studio one, I don't work in studio as such. I don't have a studio practice. I don't have a studio space. All of the work happens in relation to place and in relation to others, all of these experiential, artful, performative moments. And so when I first started the residence, I would basically float around the building and did a lot of those explorations with Erin, one of those culminating in the music for the atrium, the sound for the atrium piece that Erin talked about briefly yesterday. And so the atrium was a really important place, except that there was a lot of how do I become visible in that space, and trying to find those locations where I could set up shop even briefly, which then became a different experience when we had this permanent location to be setting ourselves up, to be accessible to students in a location that they could encounter the artists in it and their own experience of it through all the supplies available in the space. So I could see that this really contributed to my sense of belonging and sense of place as an artist in residence in this time in the Faculty of Education. So it's not necessarily a private place, but a place to settle into, to space out, and to work from. This open studio became the ground zero for the remainder of the residence, and I was really curious to see how my sense of place would be impacted taking up residence in a physical way in this space. And it could allow for this entering into another kind of interaction with the students who circulated there. So pictured here, I'm with Jessica, who was finishing up her undergrad in education at the time. And she and I ended up in many conversations. In one of the series that I offered while I was there, Art Talk, which was a weekly encounter, Jessica came back regularly to talk to me about the project she was doing in her time, in her final year. And we ended up collaborating together and showing different facets of our work at different moments through events that happened at the Art Hive. She also came with me on the weekly walks that I offered to faculty, staff, students, which I'll show in just a moment, but you get a little sort of background of the Art Hive. You saw that a moment ago in Maria's presentation and Lori's presentation as well. So we would do workshops here. I ended up being in conversation with Maren Gube, who was finishing up her PhD at the time, and she brought a group of her students to come and do a workshop together in the Art Hive. And as Maria mentioned in her presentation, Art Text also came, Jessica and Hélène from the collections there, and we did a zine workshop. So these were all various kinds of encounters around speaking about art and speaking about practices of creativity in all the different ways that this could manifest, both through an art practice that is an artist's practice or an art practice that emerges through anyone's experience of wanting to just get creative with materials. So Erin mentioned yesterday, and I'll bring this back again, we had this incredible space next to us at the Art Hive, which was this, you know, open playground because itself was an in-between space. And in that moment in time, in that physical place, we invested it in so many different ways. And so this became another ground zero for giving all kinds of workshops. And this is a group from the Cégep, André Laurando. Brett Fisher was the prof for this group, and he had inquired about bringing the students into this space and us working together, doing performance exercises in this really interesting liminal kind of space. This was a former education library. The whole space, as you know, is a former education library, but this is one part of it that was just unfinished and open for all kinds of interesting use. And so Erin and I continued to do various kinds of movement and sound collaboration in that space, and that culminated in a series of sort of an open drop-in session that went right through into the summer. And at some point in the early summer, I had done another workshop that Erin participated in, and we continued this process of really experimenting with different equipment, old school equipment, the overhead projector, various objects that we found, objects that we had made, and participants came and went and created these kinds of performative sound movement sculptural spaces together. So just really quickly, the weekly walk all through the year with different folks, here with Maren, one of our walk and talk sessions, and a couple of other students in the Faculty of Education. And as part of a final event that I wanted to kind of do a recap of the year in residence, various artists and artist academics came and participated in this day of reflection that was broken down into different kinds of activities and events. There was a group walk. This was the day of reflection around resting, walking, placemaking. And the beginning of it was a group walk together. We ended up back inside this amorphous space with Robert Luzar doing a performance Sanded Steps Standing Over Stones with a group of students who became part of this process with him over a few days. And various members of the audience were reading texts as part of Robert's presentation. And Lori Beavis did a kind of cooking demonstration looking at a bannock recipe from her grandmother that she shared with us both in the making and then in the eating. And so this was also thinking about one's relationship to place through relationship to family, through relationship to history and heritage, through food. And I'm jumping around to other things that occurred in the time in residence there. These are the images that you saw at the beginning, which were translated into these soft surfaces. And this is a piece that I ended up leaving in the Faculty of Education. I'm not quite sure where they are now, but this was an invitation for people to stop as they came into the lobby or as they would enter into the Art Hive. So you can see there's the brick wall, there's the waffle ceiling, and there's the surface of the wall next to the elevator, these hard brutalist surfaces, which I've always found very beautiful and intriguing, and yet what an interesting relationship to these hard surfaces, and a fun project to turn them into soft, inviting surfaces that were an invitation to rest here in the Art Hive. I think I'm not quite sure what my time is like, but I think I'll stop there. I had wanted to rope Aaron into a conversation, except that I think I might be out of time, and I think Aaron might be attending to his little one that was very feverish yesterday. So perhaps we could just wrap up there. It seems like a good place to wrap up. My interest in wanting to chat with Aaron was mostly just to acknowledge how such a big part of the experience in residence was the many conversations he and I had about our practice, about the space that we were inhabiting together. And similarly with Maria while we were there, and Lori and Deb, and the students who ended up becoming part of this in a really regular way. So I want to acknowledge that too. Jessica, Marin, Nick, who was just graduating himself from English, I think, came in for the regular art talk, participated in Robert's performance. This sort of mentoring that happened ended up really encouraging him to continue pursuing an art practice after graduating from the program that he did in English. So I'm seeing how these were in some ways very subtle and perhaps more one-on-one interactions, but quite impactful in their way, and how these experiences sort of followed each person, and my own practice coming out of this time in residence at McGill. So yes, I will wrap it up there. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Victoria. So we will have 30 minutes for questions and discussion. And if you have a question, please feel free to raise your hand, or you can place it in the chat. Thank you so much. These were wonderful.
I see now that there's a little note for me in the chat saying what my time was. Thank you, Shannon. It's interesting how I saw the message pop up, and it's that you see it, you don't see it. This single-minded focus on in the Zoom screen. I think I was just in time.
No problem. You're welcome.
It can be hard to monitor the chat sometimes. Aaron, go ahead, please.
Hi, Victoria. Hi, everybody. The little one's asleep, so good timing. Thank you for your talk. It's so great to see all the work. It just seems like there was so much suddenly to see that whole year. And I wanted to draw you out a little bit on the question of time, because I felt like, you know, yesterday when I was talking about the kinds of orientations throughout the year, a lot of it had to do with the spaces. And when I think of the work you did and are maybe still doing now as a PhD student at Concordia, I know you're, well, I know that something that as a non-performance artist, or somebody who doesn't produce performance or engage in performance, one thing that
I disagree, but that's another story.
As an amateur performance artist, one thing I found about the kinds of experiences that you brought into the school, they sort of required like a shift in temporality or in rhythm. Like there's something kind of not inherently, but maybe often sort of awkward about performing moments, and there's like this moment of adjustment where it's like, oh, something different is happening here. Like I'm thinking of the Robert Luzar piece with all of the brushing, or some of the things that we did together as a group in the space next to the archive. So I guess I'm wondering if, like for me, that's a very exciting thing about working in relationship to people. In relationship to you, is that you are able to kind of let people ease into that, or that kind of different frequency. But yeah, could you say something about time and temporality and the work you're doing now on slowness, and whether that is a continuation of things at McGill, or is that a different thing?
Yes, well, in fact, the research, the work that's happening in conjunction with the PhD comes directly out of the residence at McGill. The work at McGill came out of a residence that had started a couple of years earlier, thinking about how it is that we decelerate in time and space, how we slow down time through, really distilling action, performance action, and especially collectively and particularly in public contexts. And so the temporality factor is crucial, and you name a really important notion within that, the awkwardness that can ensue within that, because there is a settling into or tuning into, I like this notion of a frequency. And so it really means the capacity, and it's not always easy to do, to hold space within those moments in time where those who are around and willfully agreeing to take part also are not quite sure, what am I getting myself into? What is this that's going to happen? There is a kind of shifting of gears that does take place where we then collectively tune into place, because that is what happens. There's an apprivoisement that takes place. You arrive in the room in any kind of workshop situation, and I think whether consciously or not, the first thing that happens, or one of the first things that happens as a participant, is you're checking the place out. That means checking out, like, your body in this place. Am I safe here? What's going on around me? Who's here? How do I connect? How do I connect? And that is a time factor. And I think that a lot of these experiences that took place in the residency context, of which you were a part quite often, were often about not just arriving with here's a set of instructions, here's what you're supposed to do, now go ahead and do it. It was, okay, we're here together. What's intriguing to you about this place right now? What are you curious about that you want to explore? Is it with another person? Is it with a facet of this room? And as you saw in those images, that room was really interesting, kind of alienating, but really interesting. So there was a getting over that hump of, this is kind of alienating, but wow, those walls. Oh, look, one of Lori's recipes is actually still on the wall. Oh, look, there's these weird chairs that are here. What were these chairs used for? Oh, there's still some of the old bookshelves. There's a whole history that haunts, in the best possible sense, our experience. So what would happen in those moments, we would take the time together to kind of see, what's the place revealing to us here? What are our antenna picking up that's then now being somehow incorporated or integrated or synthesized through each of our bodies and each other to then produce these moments that we shared experience together. And we had a session of this kind of improv in the library art hive, library performance space, as part of the final event that we did collectively in our time in residence. Maria showed a few images from that. So each of us did, and Deb had a dance exercise activity workshop. Various other folks intervened in different ways. I'm just remembering the sort of movement based on Aaron and I reactivated the space again through these quirky kind of performance moments. So time ends up being so elemental, if only because there's a desire to want to not have everything figured out in advance. It's not always an easy space to hold, but to have the opportunity to just kind of fumble around a little bit and then find something. And that moment of finding, and there were several, those are flashes of inspiration and such satisfying, embodied satisfying moments, because this is the creative process in action. It's being in it and being aware of being in it when it happens, when things aren't fully formulated. And the things not being fully formulated benefit from the time that it takes. And that does carry through to these processes that I'm still engaging in and still continuing to explore in the PhD work. That's long-winded, but it also
that's great.
Speaks to what we did together too. Yeah. Thanks for that question.
Do we have other questions? Yes, Debbie, thank you. Debbie, you're muted.
I was. Hey, Victoria, now I see you. How are you?
Good to see you.
It's really nice to see everybody, to see all the pictures and to see all the history. And I want to thank Maria for this parkour, the L'Archive and also the P-Lands. And my question, it pops up a little bit what Victoria Vic was saying, also what Maria said, and Lori, with the idea of this transition. And seeing Maria's pictures, I realized how important. I mean, we had an idea, we talked about it sometimes, but now that the time passed and we see it in another way, I think the importance of the space of the archive in the P-Lands, I would say, the gathering, both using the archive, using that space. And I got there when I arrived. It was in the transition, but I arrived as a visiting artist already in the archive. And then it was just appearing. I would like to hear from you, all of you that passed by. How was it? I mean, how was this transition? Not only the space, as a physical space. It may include this too, but how was the transition of having such a huge I would say a huge space, but a huge opportunity of so many things to happen in that square feet. If I would say this, put this meaning on it. But how did you feel it? What changed between the before and after? I don't know if I was clear. Was I? Yeah.
Maybe I can start because maybe I kind of experienced the change from one to the other. When I started working as an artist in residence and exploring like all the possibilities, I think, and you could see it in the pictures and all the artist presentations, probably the main spaces we were using was the atrium that had like much more visibility, was interesting, but was also complicated. And then the space, the former library, and then the space next to it that became the archive. I think when I was an artist, and then later when Lori started working in the faculty, we were often just carrying tables like from one of these spaces to the other. You also got to see that in the pictures. We often had like tables in the atrium trying to get students to stop by and sit down and work with us. Sometimes worked better than others. But yeah, I think it was more difficult. Like we didn't probably have a sense of like agency, and also like we were not always there. Like for me, maybe what changed, like I think each space offers advantages and disadvantages, but like the archive had this sense of like, it was more reliable. Like the space, the tables, the art supplies, those things were always there. And one thing, for example, that we try and work very well, the archive was always open, even if we were not in the space. We were giving like, the space was for the community, So sometimes we were there, sometimes the artists, sometimes Lori, sometimes myself, sometimes all of us together. And it was very interesting also to see, and Victoria was talking a bit about that, how even the space changed a bit when it was either Debbie doing movement, or Lori, having a group, or Victoria and Aaron having conversations, or when we were all together and then doing like these events. And I think when I was preparing the presentation and going through all the pictures, I had like mixed feelings. In the one hand, like was amazing. I had like a lot of nostalgia. I was very excited and also a bit sad, but And I think also looking at the comments, I think the space allow the different people, the different experiences, the different communities to come together. As I said, I mean, there was and still is a lot of things going on, but I think the space became like the place in which we could like all bring all of these together. I will stop there. So maybe also Lori or Victoria want to add something.
Oh, I'll just add. You both have spoken so well about how, you know, sort of the cumulative impact and the way that, you know, in Victoria's words, I felt very much that experience was something that we all shared, and that we were sort of settling into a space that we hadn't necessarily been in ever before, and then made it, you know, adapted it and changed it, and I, you know, settled in a really good way, I think. And, you know, the other thing that I think about as well is that, to speak a little bit to Debbie's question, is that we, you know, we sort of had carte blanche. Like it was like just a perfect, you know, not perfect, nothing's perfect, but it was, you know, we just took over spaces. Like we were always moving tables and chairs and you know, things, and you know, those cushions and art supplies and stuff, and just moving things from one place to another. And we could pretty well set up anywhere we wanted in that building. And, you know, and I just remember it was like, you know, that constant trying to soften that space in some way, and then when we were able to have, you know, finally had that sort of dedicated room, that was, you know, that was extraordinary. And it was really heart-wrenching to have to pack it all up, you know. That was, and to just have watched the, you know, Maria's slideshow of all of the things that we did, is like, holy crumbs, you know, like that is amazing that we managed to do all of those things, and just intervene in that space in a really good way. And it'd be really interesting to sort of, you know, I don't know which students are here right now today, but who have been there in the past and who have now gone away, but it'd be really interesting to know about how those education students carried away, especially the ones who sort of came more regularly, how that carried away, what they carried away from that, and how it's entered into the work that they're doing now as well. I know certainly for myself that, you know, the residencies that we've set up at Daphne are just very open-ended. And again, you know, just come in and use the space. We had an artist come and sleep there, and just to be able to sort of like get a sense of how it feels and what sort of emotions that she would feel from that space. Don't tell anybody I said that. But just, it was, the idea is just very open-ended, and just, you know, to see what comes out and how the space speaks to you. So thank you very much for it. And thank you to Pauline and to all of the people. And it was just been great. Thank you so much.
We'll take a question from Coleman.
You're muted, Coleman.
You're muted.
Can you hear me now? Thank you very much for this very rich overview and a little bit of a dive into each of your journeys. I'm calling in from Takaranto, and during, I guess, Victoria's period, I was able to visit the space as part of a workshop that she spoke about, and to meet Aaron. And it struck me that in looking at kind of the macroscopic way that this space is transformed, that what shows up for me is the permaculture design term called edge effect, which I'm not sure if folks are familiar with, but it's where different ecosystems come together and meet, and in the meeting produce greater biodiversity, but also unique living systems emerge. So such as when salt water meets with fresh water, and then you have, habitat for mangroves and manatees that can only exist in the mixing of the two. So for me, it feels more like the Art Hive became this very unique space, but also an ecology. And to think kind of about how this supposedly, leftover space as yet to be repurposed at the time, invited two different systems, the artistic system and also the pedagogical use of the space, and that those somehow found a way to mix and produce something that for the time that it existed, it seemed to be quite a vibrant space. And I'm just curious from each of you whether you thought about how the ecology with each other and how this was felt through, or how this was emergent for you in terms of collaboration with each other, with teachers, with students. What did you discover that was a surprise?
I kind of want Maria to jump in and answer first, but that's not meaning to put you on the spot. I just feel like you're well poised to jump in on that one first, only if you feel you are also.
Well, yeah, that's a very good question. What, I don't know, like in terms of discoveries or even new knowledge, and also the idea of connections. It's interesting because the space in which we ended up having the Art Hive used to be called the Eduquarium. So now that you were talking about it, it completely made sense because it was all surrounded by windows, As I said at the beginning, I think I was very, very lucky because I had the opportunity to work with several of the groups of artists in residence during the time that I was there. Sometimes we collaborated, sometimes I was just a spectator, sometimes, and I think just that was like an amazing learning experience for me, like how each one of us, like we knew each artist's practice, but then to see how each artist transformed that practice into this work with the community of education, like how the same spaces were transformed in completely different ways by each artist, not only based on their own practices, but also in the collaborations that they were doing between them, because it was very nice also how we all ended up collaborating with each other and having these dialogues that were verbal, but also material, performatic, visual. So I think that was amazing. And on the other hand, also for me to discover, I briefly mentioned that, but how much like creativity was already going on in the Faculty of Education. And again, completely different things, but students involved into music and dance and art making, but also faculty using the arts as research tools, staff members, people that otherwise maybe people that tends to be like maybe just working in the office, and in the moment they came to the Art Hive, they ended up teaching workshops of how to do like this amazing like folded paper. So again, how the arts became like this great opportunity for people that maybe naturally wouldn't connect easily because they belong like to completely different like spheres of a Faculty of Education, and they have how they were connecting through the arts. I think that was amazing. And I really hope that those connections, even the space is not there, those connections are still there and are still working, and will create like new connections as well. Thanks.
I think I love the idea of the ecosystems coming together, and I think, again, a lot has already been said, but one of the things, of course, that was the greatest thing was to have gone in September 2016, and to already have visited Maria in the space, and then also just to have Maria there and stay on, and as a sort of introductory person who sort of had already done, all of the work of like figuring out the infrastructure of how we were going to actually work and be in that space in a good way. And I think that the thing that I keep coming back to is the really small moments with many of the students. Like there were a lot of students who were just like, and it was really surprising that a lot of students just could not bring themselves to stop and just take the time to just, come and sit at a table. And we've moved those tables in that atrium around so much so that, we were like always trying to like, just if we're over here, they can't get past us until they at least make an interaction, or if we're over here, and then all of that kind of, so there was that, but they were just like, no, I have to get to class. I have too much homework. I just have to go. And they would just like make their way. But there were the other ones who were, and I've lost their names as well, which I feel really badly about, but it's just, and I just think about it as sort of small moments in which they did come and they sat, and then they came back and sought us out again, and often sort of asking, advice or whatever. But just to have those moments of, it was like a respite for them, and just to be able to take the time to whether to sort of work with clay or to make something or whatever, and to discover some new medium, to come to the film on that week or whatever. So there was just, I think that was probably the nicest surprise, and the one that I carry with me is those small interactions with those different students.
And I
question.
Yeah, and so in agreement with Lori or that really resonates for me as well. And even acknowledging, in the passage that I read, that this became a place to hang out. So I also really appreciated, and I think there was a general sense, that kind of atmosphere of, this is a free space, which is to say, I can do things, there's materials here and it's inspiring. And I could just not do anything. There was a kettle with tea. People, word of mouth, oh, there's a place we can come and just sit and have tea together. So small groups of students would just come through to just sit and chat with each other. Sometimes there were these two young women that came in pretty regularly. They were watching a series together on Netflix. Like, it's a funny thing to think, like, you're here, you could be making something, but they kind of were making something. This was like precious time for them together to watch something, which for some reason, this was the best place for them. This is where they love to come and do this Netflix watching together. And this became their ritual. So I loved seeing how these little rituals formed of people's usage of the space, the different ways people came to interact with each other within this space. And often, because we were always there would be this interaction with one of us, whoever happened to be there in some form or other. So I want to say, and this is a conversation for another time, one of my preoccupations is around how we make, what constitutes making, what constitutes knowledge production. It might not be something that you see very visibly materially on the surface. It doesn't mean that it's not there and that it's not happening. But that's hence this invisible liminal space that I was referring to. So I really appreciated those little snippets, those slices of life that happened in the art hive. That's the Coleman, the intersection of ecologies that you're talking about there too. And it was really fun to be witness to that, even if we weren't directly interacting with everyone who came through those doors.
Thank you so much, everyone. That's a wrap on our fourth panel. Thank you to the artists for all of your wonderful presentations. It was truly inspiring today. The next panel will be at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and will feature a summary of the panelists by our respondents, followed by a live discussion with the audience. This talkback panel will be moderated by the wonderful Dr. Claudia Mitchell and will feature Cassandra Jones, Shannon Roy, Dr. Hani Sadat, and Dr. Ann Smith. This is an opportunity to talk further about the 12 artists in residence and their work presented at this symposium, and about the importance of artists in residence within educational institutions in Canada. You are welcome to stay in the Zoom until we start or return using the same link at 2 o'clock. If you stay, you may move to a waiting room as we set up for tech. The symposium information can be found on the website. And thank you again for joining us today. I hope you all have a lovely afternoon.